Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Today, we're going to talk about navigating difficult conversations and how to do that with confidence. My name is Muireann Wynne. I'm a founder and mentor of the Hive Nursing Development, and I run the business with my friend Lisa Lucas, who is founder and CEO. Today, we're going to provide you with a clear framework for approaching difficult conversations, equip you with some tools to improve outcomes, and hopefully help you foster better relationships in both your personal and professional settings. After today's session, you will have an understanding of the key factors that make conversations difficult and how they can impact communication dynamics. We'll review some effective framing techniques to structure difficult conversations in a way that provides clarity, collaboration, and positive outcomes. We'll also have a look at some of the common mistakes made during some of these challenging discussions and help you to identify strategies to overcome them. And we'll review some practical tips and techniques that can enhance your communication skills and help you build your confidence in navigating difficult conversations. What makes conversations difficult? Difficult conversations are often conversations where emotions are high or where we feel vulnerable or unheard. There are so many different definitions of difficult conversations, but the bottom line is that these are conversations that we dread having and that we find unpleasant. What makes it difficult for each of us as individuals will vary, as different things make different people feel vulnerable. All of us have a preferred inherent communication style and a preference for how we deliver and receive information. Some of the things that you'll see on the slides will contribute to how you explore those conversations. Often tension, we can feel quite emotionally charged. It can create feelings of vulnerability. We can feel defensive, or we can feel like we're not being listened to or heard. They're often quite unpleasant before, during, and after, and we can create a lot of anticipation and anxiety around having these conversations. We also need to recognize that what makes it difficult for us might not be the same reason that it's difficult for someone else. A lot of this depends on our own personal triggers, our own values, and our own past experiences. And we do all have our own unique communication preferences. How we give and receive information can directly impact the experience and how we hold those conversations. In order to help us try and understand our own triggers of what makes it difficult, that really is the first step, is knowing our own emotions in this space. We're going to move to a brief activity that you can do at home. So what I'd like you to do is think of an example of a conversation that you found difficult and consider the following questions. What made it difficult for me? How did it make me feel? What was the outcome? And if I had a chance to have this conversation again, what would I change? So have a think about something in a professional setting, preferably, and see if you can answer some of those questions at home. Likely themes that we find, or common themes that we find that come up with people, include kind of interpersonal conflict, peer conversations, conversations where we may have to provide feedback to someone who is superior to us in a professional context. Sometimes we have content or topic related conversations that can be triggering for us. So things like performance management, perhaps addressing clinical incidents with somebody, or managing someone who has been displaying unfavorable behavior. We can also feel a little bit of emotional dissonance with some of these conversations. So if we professionally need to have a conversation that challenges our own values versus the action that we have to take, it's important to recognize that as well. Sometimes we can feel, I guess, a great sense of anticipation if we have uncertainty about what the outcome of the conversation is going to be, or if we're fearful of emotional reactions from who we're having the conversation with. And we also bring our own previous experiences to the table. So if we've had a bad experience or a bad outcome, it's likely that that's going to impact us. We can also have fear of consequences or reprimand, and that if we have conflicting perceptions of the issue being discussed. So have a think about some of those things when you're answering those 4 questions, and use it as a reflection opportunity moving forward into the rest of the content. So how do you have or hold a difficult conversation? There is about 1 million books written on how to hold difficult conversations, endless research, and it's actually quite difficult to pick a system that can give you what you need in a way that's easy and usable and feels right for the type of business that you need to do. I would recommend that people do their own research and find a system that suits for them. I know early on in my career, I read a book about having difficult conversations, and the book was called What Matters Most by a guy called Douglas Stone. It's actually probably a bit older now. It's just reflective of my age, I think. But it was quite new when I read it. I remember reading bits and pieces of the book, but never in one go, and being able to take tangible bits that I needed at the time. I had had a very difficult experience with a very emotional conversation in which there was lots of shouting, and was really struggling to analyze what went wrong. And this book was really gold for me in helping me to analyze my own bits and pieces in that conversation and learning how I could do better. In that book, he defines 3 components of a difficult conversation really, really neatly, and discusses the most common mistakes that people make under these 3 headings. And I think in my example, I was probably guilty of all of the common mistakes. So what you can see on your slides is the 3 headings that he discusses difficult conversations with. So he talks about what happened. The first mistake people often make involves conflicting perceptions of the issue being discussed. So when the person holding the conversation considers the what happened part of the issues, they assume they're looking at a factual matter, and they assume that their view of that matter is correct. Often parties or both parties will agree on the bare facts, but they differ in their own interpretation of what the facts mean and of what is important. The second set of mistakes really concern understanding the other party's intentions. So we make assumptions and about what the other person's intentions are. However, our beliefs about another person's intentions are often wrong. We base our assumptions on our own feelings. For example, if I feel hurt, then you must have meant to be hurtful. And we also tend to think the worst of others and the best of ourselves. Another mistake is to assume that once we explain that our intentions were benign, that the other person has no reason to feel hurt. And a really big third mistake in kind of the what happened of a difficult conversation occurs when parties focus on assigning blame. It's a really bad idea because it inhibits our ability to learn what's really causing the problem, and it inhibits our kind of ability to do anything meaningful to correct it. Difficult conversations are inherently difficult because there are feelings involved. So expressing emotions in a professional setting is risky to most of us, and it makes us feel vulnerable. Many people mistakenly frame difficult conversations in a way that ignore the emotional content, and they translate their feelings into judgments, characterizations, and attributions about the other person. This ties into focusing blame, which is what we already discussed in what happened component. The need to blame often indicates unexpressed emotions and feelings, and it can leak back into the conversation. It can preoccupy the conversation. And when that happens, people lose their ability to be a good listener. So being able to acknowledge vulnerability in a professional way is a really useful tool, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later. The third component is identity. So some of these conversations are difficult because they threaten or challenge a person's sense of who they are. So they may call into question a person's competency, their goodness, and an all or nothing thinking can make people feel more vulnerable to identity crises. So you may be challenging how they see themselves, how we see them, and it can become quite black and white, looking at a good versus bad outcome of that conversation. So they're just some things to bear in mind when you're looking to frame a conversation, and really knowing your own part in that conversation before you move ahead. So considering this new information and some of the examples, hopefully, that you've had a chance to reflect on in activity 1, can you frame that conversation on reflection under the headings of what happened, feelings, and identity, as we've just discussed? When you review it, have a look and see what's changed. Has your perception of how that conversation went and the reason it may have gone poorly changed? Does it change your previous thoughts, and does it change how you might hold that conversation again if you were to move into the future? So how to avoid common mistakes when you're going to hold a difficult conversation. So, to move toward a genuine two-way conversation, you have to shift from certainty about your own views to curiosity about the other's views of the situation. So, you're really aiming to come from a place of curiosity rather than a place of judgment for your conversation. And you also need to understand other people's perspectives and try and understand why they interpret the situation in the way that they do. This is much easier said than done, but I promise if you can do it, it will change the outcome of your conversations in the end. In feelings, as we've discussed before, the need to blame in a difficult conversation often indicates unexpressed emotions. So understanding, reevaluating our own thoughts, perceptions, and beliefs that have kind of given rise to those emotions will allow us to negotiate with ourselves and shift or moderate them before the conversation can begin. So the first step in expressing feelings is to acknowledge that they are an important part of the situation, whether or not they are rational. Both parties in the conversation should be allowed to convey the kind of complexity around what they're feeling in this situation and should avoid rushing into the bulk of the conversation without doing that in the first instance. Moving into identity before you hold these conversations really requires you to do some learning about what issues are most important to you and understanding your own values and beliefs. And you need to learn how to adapt that in a healthy way for holding these conversations. You know, having a genuine understanding of your own values and beliefs and understanding that the outcome of the conversation is not indicative of who you are as a person or who they are as a person is really helpful to try and avoid conflict. And other ways that you can control some of that identity crisis is to maintain a balanced sense of self in difficult conversations and really genuinely trying not to control the other person's reactions and remaining calm can really help move that forward. So now that we've had a look how to frame difficult conversations and have an understanding of some of the common mistakes that we make, we can talk through some general tips and tricks that you can use to help you feel more comfortable in this space. I think first and foremost, it's really important to remember that if you're a line manager for a team, there are set things that everybody deserves from you in a professional context. So you need to be respectful. You need to genuinely have an open mind. You need to listen genuinely. And that comes back to that coming from a place of curiosity to understand. They need to feel valued and heard. And you need to be honest and very clear in what your expectations are. And those expectations need to be reasonable and they should be aligned with whatever, procedures and policies you need to adhere to for your own workplace. And most importantly, they need you to be calm and to maintain professionalism. And I think that's really important. We've all seen where when someone responds emotionally, the line manager responds emotionally back, and it's just not useful. It's not conducive to having good outcomes. I think the how and the how to do it are really important. So preparation is key, but not to the point where your conversation sounds like a speech or it sounds unnatural or sounds rehearsed, like you're delivering a speech to them. So consider having some bullet points that you need to discuss, but you need to be flexible around how you speak to them and how they occur in the conversation. So they may not necessarily happen in the order that you have them written down, but they can still be brought into the conversation. So try and let the conversation take its natural course as much as possible. You need to be very conscious to choose the right time and the right environment to hold these conversations. So if, for example, you're working in a clinical space, you wouldn't hold a conversation about performance management on the clinical floor. If it's a formal conversation, similar, it should be held in a private area after the immediate situation or incident has settled. You don't want to be having a conversation with someone who is still emotional or still angry or still very heavily involved in resolving a clinical situation, for example. So maybe the next day or the next time they're on shift might be preferable. So just consider case by case where that time and place might be most appropriate. You really need to prepare yourself as the person holding the conversation emotionally and mentally to remain calm and focused. You need to own your own part of the issue if that's appropriate for that situation. So the more easily you can admit to your own mistakes or your own mixed intentions and your own contributions to the problem, the more balanced you're going to feel during the conversation and the higher the chances are that it will go well. So I've got technical knowledge there, and that really refers in this instance to knowing your business. So if there's HR process involved, if there is a complaints resolution process to be followed, you really owe it to that person that you have your technical knowledge around that process correct so that you can refer back to it if the conversation doesn't go well. Don't wait and don't procrastinate. So I know I have just said not to choosing the right time and place and not immediately if someone's angry. On the other end of that, you shouldn't procrastinate and have a conversation in, 3 weeks' time for something that should have been addressed today. So having that conversation in a timely way, it will help keep the issues fresh in your mind, and it will demonstrate fairness to them. It's very, very difficult to address something retrospectively if it should have been done much closer to the time. Sticking to the facts, keep it factual, don't bring perceptions, don't bring emotions. When you're referring to the incident itself, just keep it factual will really be helpful. You need to keep an open mind and consider the other person's perspective and be confident in your position. And when I say be confident, that is based on evidence and that technical knowledge, not on your perspective or your feelings. You need to demonstrate empathy and listen and seek clarity if it's required. Really having a solution-focused approach to these conversations is helpful. You can actually brainstorm together with the person that you're holding a conversation with about what might need to happen moving forward. Obviously, you'll have your own localized policy and procedure to adhere to, but involving the other person in that solution design is really helpful. Being transparent, if the conversation is being noted formally, is really important. You don't want to blindside someone after the fact if, with a file note or a personnel file, if you haven't been upfront about that in the first place. And that comes back to also being clear in your expectations. Those expectations should be documented if it's a formal and within that file note, and you should share that with that person after the conversation, just to make sure that it's a true and accurate reflection of the conversation. Most importantly, following up afterwards to touch base is a really good way of maintaining that rapport. Demonstrates emotional intelligence in you as the person holding the conversation. And it also shows that you recognize it was a difficult conversation and a difficult situation for that person. The benefits of choosing to operate in this way and holding difficult conversations well, you will see that it creates trust and builds relationships, and that it creates a sense of transparency within your team. You will find that you will have improved conflict resolution and you'll lift employee performance and engagement, particularly around performance conversations. You'll have clearer expectations and future direction. You'll have improved leadership skills. And you're also demonstrating value to the employee. You're showing them that you value them enough to have this conversation and that you want the best for them moving forward. So some takeaway key messages from today's slides. You need to create safety and value for your teams, and doing this well will really help to create that. Seeking to understand is key, and it needs to be genuine, not just ticking the box to say that. And that involves that really active listening and being willing to shift and change our own perceptions and preconceived ideas of maybe what a positive outcome can be. Learning and reflecting, and that's for everybody. That's not just for the employees, that is for you as the person holding these conversations as well. And moving forward that comes back to that solution focus and really wanting a positive resolution, not hanging on to things and considering them kind of closed once it's appropriate, and moving that forward for your team. So I hope you've enjoyed today's topic. We all know effective communication is a work in progress, and holding difficult conversations is one of the most challenging aspects of our work. There's so many variables, so many different types of encounters that we need to be able to adapt our style to suit. So don't be too hard on yourselves. Learn from your mistakes by reflecting on how you might improve or do things differently next time, and give it a go. Thank you very much.